My hope is that more Americans will tune in to watch Conservative Roundtable to find out what's really going on. Thanks.
From the nation's capital, the Conservative Caucus presents Conservative Roundtable, an in-depth look at today's most important issues.
Welcome to Conservative Roundtable. I'm Howard Phillips. Our guest for this broadcast is Balint Vazsony. Dr. Vazsony, you came to the United States in 1956. That was the time of the Hungarian Revolution. I recall it well. I recall the degree to which the Hungarian people were repeatedly betrayed, even during the uprising, by the Soviets, and how indeed they were betrayed by the government of the United States in terms of prior expectations which had been raised. Nonetheless, I know that you and other Hungarians who came to the United States have become, you in particular, strong advocates of the liberty, which for all of its setbacks in this country still stands in stark contrast to much of what we see elsewhere in the world. Tell us a little bit about your experience, how you came to America, and what your life was like in Hungary before that, and what you've been doing since.
My life in Hungary was a great many things, and I would mention in first place that I was 8 years old when the Nazis occupied Budapest, my city of birth, and just a year later, when the Russians fought off the Nazis, they of course forgot to go home, and we found ourselves in the grip of the worst period of Stalinism for many years. And I was 20 years old when the revolution broke out, and long before that I had promised myself that if there would be one day when the borders are open, I would leave. I actually waited much longer because, as you mentioned, there were some expectations that the revolution might succeed to some extent. In fact, it did for a few days. But there were all sorts of things in the macro politics of the day. And
what were you doing during the revolution? How old were you at the time?
20.
You were 20.
I was 20. By profession, I'm a concert pianist, and I started playing in public already when I was 12. So I was already, to some extent, a professional. But I was also a student at the Music Academy, and I found myself in charge of organizing the demonstration, which 6 hours later led to the revolution, although we really didn't know what had happened, and some of your older viewers might remember this. There was at that time a particular movement of Polish writers to obtain more freedoms from the Soviets. And our demonstration actually started out just as sympathy for Polish writers. Little did we know, university students, who we were, that we would be joined by the whole country in a matter of hours. And of course the rest is history.
What kind of threats to your physical person did you experience?
I hate to tell you, but by that time I was so used to it that even though the bullets were flying and the tanks were all over the place, unfortunately it wasn't anything new, because I spent, for instance, the last 4 months of World War II in a cellar not much larger than the studio, where 300 people lived and died during that period. And I don't know if you remember this, but Budapest was one of those cities where the Germans literally did not give up a single house as long as it stood. So street fighting in the streets and being totally exposed to the elements, and the elements here included machine guns, tanks, bombs, etc., was standard procedure for us, which incidentally is one of the reasons why I'm such a admirer of the Second Amendment, and I'm not here to talk about that tonight.
Let's talk about it for a moment. The great myth is that the Second Amendment is to let people shoot ducks or even to defend against crime. Its real purpose is to prevent tyranny. It's to prevent the government from having a monopoly of force so that the average citizen can have a gun to defend himself against oppressive political power. If the government understands that there are millions of people out there who are armed and capable of self-defense, they'll think twice before they go further than they would like.
Of course, if you are a landlocked country like Hungary, it's not just the government, it's also foreign powers who might think twice against an armed population. And there were three very specific instances in my life where it would have made every difference in the world if the population had been armed.
Balint, I've had the privilege of visiting Budapest. It is a magnificent city. The government building is probably the most beautiful such building in the entire world. I've never seen a more beautiful building of that kind. The Habsburgs certainly left quite a legacy. What effect did the Nazi occupation, the communist occupation, have on the spirit, on the culture, on the faith of the people of Hungary?
This is a difficult issue because 5 years ago, when Hungary really led the world, actually it's by now 6 years ago, by letting East German refugees depart for Austria, making thereby the Berlin Wall a ridiculous remnant and eventually leading to its demise. At that time, Hungary, for the first time in 500 years, was given an opportunity to be on her own and to build an independent and prosperous future. In response to your question, the worst legacy of these terrible regimes is the existence of generations who don't quite know what to do with the opportunity. And what I have learned in my 20 years there, and what I am desperate to communicate to Americans today, is that one generation is almost too long a time for a dictatorship to destroy that which a millennium has built. And what would be so important to realize is that it takes very, very little time to destroy. It takes a long time to build.
Now, you have established an organization dedicated to the proposition that Americans shall be reminded of what permitted this country to enjoy the greatest degree of liberty and opportunity in the history of the world. It's called the Center for the American Founding. Tell us what happened, if you would, from the time you came to America to the time you established the Center for the American Founding.
I have to go back a little bit further because I was 10 years old when I saw Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. And I think it determined my life in many ways. Subsequent to that, I read many American books in Hungarian translation. At that time, I didn't speak any English when I came here. But my relationship with America really goes back to my early childhood. And in a converse way or inverse way, another reading influenced me just as much, and that was Marx's Communist Manifesto, which I read when I was 12. And that also decided or determined for the rest of my life how I would think. And that also taught me that foul deeds are always preceded by foul thoughts.
Very good point.
Which is why it's important to know the thinking of people.
Let's say that again. Foul deeds are preceded by foul thoughts. That's a brilliant insight, and it's obvious but important to remember.
So when I came here, it was with a great deal of preparation, even though I didn't speak the language. And it's the typical immigrant story. I arrived with $23 in my pocket and toothbrush and 2 pairs of socks.
Did you have a family with you?
I left with my mother and brother, but they went to Switzerland and I came here. That's how we ended up. And eventually my brother came over here as well. But in any case, I arrived here and I went to study with a very great Hungarian musician who spent the last 10 years of his life in Tallahassee. So that's where I ended up. That's where I met my future wife, actually, on my very first day in this country. She was born in Alabama, but she was also studying at Florida State University. And I became a citizen in '64. But I'm going to tell you what was perhaps the decisive moment. I arrived here without ever having known what human rights really meant. And as a stateless person, an immigrant, a refugee, I still wasn't a participant in that fully. But being a pianist, I needed to travel back and forth, giving concerts in Europe as well as here. And I did that still with my green card as an immigrant. And one of those returns to the United States, when I landed at what was then still Idlewild Airport in New York.
That was a better name.
I was examined by the immigration officer, and you know that generally speaking, immigration officers are not your warmest and most embracing human beings. But this particular one looked at my green card, noticing that I obviously was not a citizen, and nevertheless said, "Good afternoon, sir, welcome home." And that was a big moment.
We're going to hear more of these moments after a break, and we're going to give our audience the privilege of learning some of the exciting things you're doing with the Center for the American Founding. Please stay with us. We'll be back with Dr. Balint Vazsony following these messages. Please stay with us. Hi, I'm Howard Phillips, Chairman of the Conservative Caucus. I'm inviting you to learn more about the Conservative Caucus, a grassroots public policy action organization that was founded in 1974. Whether you're opposed to socialized medicine, interested in making Congress more accountable, stopping the New World Order, fighting gun control, reducing taxes, or restoring America to its biblical premises and constitutional boundaries, we're the organization you're looking for. Please call the number on your screen to get more information about our work.
For more information, write the Conservative Caucus, 450 Maple Avenue East, Vienna, Virginia, 22180, or call 703-938-9626.
Welcome back. This is Howard Phillips with our guest, Dr. Balint Vazsony, and we're talking about liberty, about America, and about the life experiences which our guest has had, which have led him to take action. Balint, why don't you continue the discussion where you left off?
After many years, I began to think about the reasons for the greatness of this country and why and how this society managed to become the most successful in the history of the planet, which is something that a lot of people take for granted. But my goodness, if you just consider this sentence, the most successful society in the history of the planet, wouldn't you want to know why? And it's not only that this society has been the envy of the world, it has also stood guard at the gates and literally saved the world, the civilized world, from destruction throughout this century. And the principles, the laws, the attitudes that our founders inherited came from another English-speaking country, Great Britain, which did the same thing for a long time, because if you go back down the centuries, you will find that anybody who wanted to rule the world found that there was first a British Navy and then an American Navy, which would see to it that the high seas remained free for navigation and that nobody could simply take the world and make it his toy. So it's very important to understand why and how. And I started thinking and eventually writing about this, and found that really the last 150 years or so, there have only been two schools of thought when it comes to politics. One was the line that the founders established and bequeathed to us, and the other one was the other one. It comes by many different names, and I don't know which one you might prefer. I used to refer to it as German philosophy because by that time it was mostly German philosophers who wrote that way. But I think more than anything, the world knows it under the title socialism. Socialism comes in many costumes. In fact, it's one of its great assets that it can put on any costume and look like an indigenous product. So socialism has been with us under Nazism, fascism, Bolshevism, Maoism, and it's all the same kind of thinking.
It's really a theory of justice for people who are angry, for people who feel that God has improperly arranged the world. Things aren't the way they think it should be, and therefore they want to assign to the state the power to reorder society so that it fits their conception of how things ought to be, instead of the conception that God has laid out for us.
Well, you are almost too charitable when you say they want to assign this power to the state, because more than anything they want to assign it to themselves.
It
really is the most arrogant philosophy.
They want to be God. They're angry that they are not God.
And it's, you know, it's very interesting. A great German philosopher whose name is worshipped and who was a tremendous intellect, his name was Kant, and he just wrote down a sentence in the preface of his most important book, which simply declares the book free from error. Now, it took another German philosopher, Nietzsche, 100 years to declare God actually dead. But it starts with this sentence which says that a man-made book is free from error. And so today's liberals in America are, of course, continuing that line. And I even wonder if one should describe it as the politics of arrogance and our view as the politics of humility. Because I think the founders created, first of all, so few laws because God's law was a given. So man-made laws needn't be so many.
They could say ignorance of the law is no excuse because everyone knew the Bible, everyone knew what God's commandments were, and they've cluttered it up quite a bit since then and have not improved on it.
You know, it's so funny. I recently was asked to review James Carville's book. I think the title is We Are Right, They Are Wrong. You know James Carville,
of course.
President Clinton's campaign manager.
The angry man from Louisiana who thinks he's very funny.
Well, what's interesting is that even he says somewhere that this morality thing will have to be addressed, but we must find a way, he says, not to preach too much about it, and we should have figured out a long time ago how to make it simple. So I ended my review by saying, we have, Mr. Carville, it's called the Ten Commandments.
Well, he would be well advised to learn that it is not the economy, stupid.
But coming back to the founding, the founders made so few laws because they realized that the fewer the laws, the more people can agree to them naturally.
You know, Balint, it's interesting that the Ten Commandments are thou shalt nots, by and large, and the Bill of Rights to the Constitution are also thou shalt nots. Congress shall make no law. That's the spirit of it. The purpose of the law is to restrain undue activity, whether it's to restrain us from doing improper things or to restrain government, in the case of the Bill of Rights, from doing improper things.
But of course today, the great American virtues of tolerance and voluntarism are being choked by coercive laws which tell you exactly what you have to do, which is the opposite of what you are saying.
And they've co-opted such words as tolerance to encourage us to believe that we have to tolerate evil and wrongdoing in the name of tolerance.
It's interesting. One of the ways we try to define communism...
Bob Dole has made quite an issue of this with the Republican platform. He has argued that toleration of people who kill babies is equivalent to toleration of people who may disagree about environmental laws. So the word tolerance has been taken out of context.
It has been, let's say, it's been broadened.
Yes.
But you might find it amusing if I tell you that in Hungary we defined one of the definitions we made up about communism was that it's a system in which nothing is permitted, but that which is permitted is compulsory. And I don't know if you recognize in this some contemporary trends.
Absolutely.
Anyway, coming back to the center, after writing about this and understanding or trying to understand the few truly vital principles that have made this country great and this society successful, I came up with a single-page document called the Reaffirmation of the American Founding. Now, it seems perhaps pretentious to try to do this in one page, but it is the result of 30 years of thinking.
Some of the greatest documents in history are concisely presented.
In any case, this led to the formation of the center, and it's very, very young. It's perhaps 2.5 months old.
What are your goals for the center?
In the short term, the goal is a very simple one. We would like to focus the national discussion away from the single issues, which seem to be in mid-air, anchored nowhere, and very often result in a simple beauty contest between two candidates. And we would like our positions to be tied to the founding principles, and therefore ask the American people really one simple question, Howard. Is this country to remain the United States of America as conceived by the founders and following the course that has made it successful for 200 years? Or are the people resigned to watch the emergence of an entirely different type of country?
The word precedes the action, as you indicated earlier. You have the word. How do you translate that into action?
In the first instance, we have this document which we are offering for anyone who is interested to sign. And I must tell you that the results have been most rewarding, even overwhelming. I have been on many radio shows in every area of the country, and typically after I go off the air, the telephone rings off the hook and we get hundreds of requests, and we don't even have an 800 number.
So basically what you're doing is provoking a redirection of the national debate back to first principles.
Yes. And I'm delighted to report that 2 weeks ago a Dear Colleague letter was issued by 3 very prominent members of the House of Representatives recommending this as a vision for the members, and many others have signed on since. And there is very serious interest in the Congress of the United States. And in many other quarters, I was very lucky to assemble a most distinguished advisory committee right at the beginning.
It's an excellent committee.
But I think the most rewarding thing is, if you can imagine this picture, Howard, you are driving your car in Seattle in the morning rush hour, and suddenly over the radio you hear someone with my unpronounceable name and funny accent talk about this for 10 minutes, and you stop your car and go somewhere to pick up a phone to call and say, I want 25 copies of this because I want to sign it and I want my neighbors to sign it. And that's what's happening every day in San Antonio and in Toledo.
And of course, Congress isn't really your target. Congress simply adds attention to what you're doing. Your real target is the heart and the mind of American citizens across the breadth of the land. We're going to have to take a break. When we come back, I hope you'll tell our viewers how they can receive your document and learn more about the Center for the American Founding. We'll be back after these messages. Please stay with us. Hello, I'm Howard Phillips. The Conservative Caucus has been actively fighting since 1974 for less expensive government and lower taxes imposed upon the American people by the federal government. If you want to become part of our effort to reduce the size and cost and regulatory burden of the federal government, I hope you will call the number shown on your screen.
For more information about the Conservative Caucus, write us at 450 Maple Avenue East, Vienna, Virginia, 22180, or call 703-938-9626. Here's how you can become a citizen lobbyist and influence how your representatives vote. Write a letter to your congressmen and senators. Speak out on a call-in talk radio program. Write a letter to the editor of your local newspaper, and call the Conservative Caucus for more information at 703-938-9626.
Welcome back. Howard Phillips with Dr. Balint Vazsony. Balint, we have just a couple of minutes left. Let's draw the bottom line. You started in Hungary. You came here. You developed you had a passion for justice and for liberty while you were in Hungary. You developed a passion for America while you were here. You tried to understand what it was that made America the greatest country in the history of the world. You grieve over our loss of that greatness, potentially, because we have forgotten our history. And now you've set upon a course to preserve it and perpetuate it. Where does it go from here?
I believe that if the American people are asked to focus their attention on the founding principles, if Americans realize what could be permanently lost very soon, an overwhelming majority would go one way, the American way. What I'm afraid is happening if we don't do this is that we will lose America not by design but by default, because we simply don't realize,
At least not by our design.
well, we don't realize the incremental loss of everything. And the founding principles were so few but so telling. And if you look at the dozens, if not hundreds, of issues all around there, you will see that every one of them could be easily decided if you just ask yourself what the founders would have intended in such a case. They gave the clearest direction. They provided the best roadmap
Now, you
for
obviously
success.
have done a lot of reading to get up to speed on American history to the extent that you have. If people write to the Center for the American Founding, what do you send them?
In the first instance, we send them a fact sheet about the center, and we send them a copy of the Reaffirmation of the American founding. If they would like to have the philosophical background, we have a paper with the title The Battle for America's Soul, which lays out really black on white exactly where these ideas come from, where they have been, and where they might lead if we are not careful. So if people simply want to look at the Reaffirmation and consider signing it, we would be happy to send that. If they would like to read more about the background, we'll be happy to oblige.
And where is the center located? What is the address?
It is located in McLean, Virginia. The address is 1311, 1311 Dolly Madison Boulevard, Suite 2A, McLean, Virginia. Zip code is 22101. We do not charge for any of these things. And if people write to us or phone us, we will be happy to respond very quickly.
Well, Doctor, it has been a real pleasure having this conversation with you, and I look forward with great interest to observing your progress and your work in the months and years ahead. Thank you so much for being our guest, and thank you for joining us on this edition of Conservative Roundtable.